For reference, the last time industrial lands were rezoned was in 2007, and the process was controversial. We have taken a long road to what is before us today, and I know council colleagues, I have been talking to you about this since March. This process has been going on for many years.
Well, that's Councilmember Dan Strauss, chair of the Land Use Committee, talking about a long-awaited deal to update zoning in Seattle's industrial areas to allow for more housing and other uses, too. What impact will that have on the city? Plus, why is Councilmember Kshama Sawant talking about rent control again? And what chances does she have in successfully passing such legislation? Plus, after a weekend of monstrous road closures around our region with construction work on major thruways like 520 and I-90, what's on the docket for the rest of the summer? Well, guess what? School's out, but you still got to do some thinking and listening this week once again on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. And joining me once again is my co-host, David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I saw a great tweet from you last week. Is there really a pre-pandemic 3-plus-year-old paper for sale on board the ferry Tacoma? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's been there. It's been sitting there since March of 2020, this paper on the Tacoma. It's like on the display. And,
right.
Every year or so I check and it's still there. And it talks about, social distancing in parks and things like that.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Wow.
Yellowing at this point. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I could buy it, but I kind of like it just sitting there.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing, and you got to restock it with something. I mean, you work for the Times. Let's figure this out. At any rate, thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso, on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. We've had a few people join the show as patrons over the last couple of weeks. Thank you very much for that. But we could definitely use some more support. And you get your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal if you can help out at the $5 level. We'll feature an action photo of your sticker on our show because, we're stuck on you. So please send them in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews @gmail.com. You can see that photo when you see the video version of this show on Converge Media. Converge airs the video of the podcast Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's go with Right Here, Right Now. David, a pretty big and complex decision for the Seattle City Council this week as it looks at ways to protect its industrial lands for industry while also allowing for some new uses like housing. And I thought this was really interesting because as much as we talk about increasing our housing stock, which is very important, protecting the geographic areas where good blue-collar jobs are available is important too. What's your take on what the city is trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, this is sort of the tension, I think, between industry and development is one that we see play out across the city. It's not, we think about SoDo and Harbor Island and the port down there, but, it's also in Ballard, of course, and, think about the bike lane even near the cruise ships. I mean, there's a lot of sort of tension that often shows up between this, old industry that we have in Seattle and then, the pressure to grow and adapt with the times. The argument that the industry people make are once these lands are no longer industrial, they will never become industrial again. And so they're very protective, even more so than you might maybe expect from certain voices. I think of Port Commissioner Ryan Calkins, for example. He's sort of generally a kind of pro-development urbanist type, but like even he, as a port commissioner, was opposed to this 900-unit development kind of near the stadium.
That one on SoDo,
Yeah, which that seems to be the kind of most controversial decision to not allow that to move forward. And, his argument was basically, it's creeping in on industrial lands, and we have to be really protective of that. So, it brings out sort of, I think, an essential tension in Seattle between these two desires to sort of preserve what's there while also making space to grow.
Yeah. And just jumping back on that idea, the units you were talking about housing in SoDo there, this was an operation called the Makers District, folks, in case you missed this. Came to a head back in June. This was a development that would have provided housing, hotels, commercial spaces for artists and brewers there. And it did have some support from the stadium's housing proponents and organized labor. But the Port of Seattle, as you mentioned, David, was able to successfully push back on this, saying such a development would impede trucks from picking up cargo from ships on Elliott Bay, etc. This reminds me so much of the failed plan to build a pro basketball arena in SoDo about 9 years ago or so. And I just wanted your take on this, David. What impact does new construction in SoDo really have on freight? Because I remember the plans from 9 years ago, and I've read about some more recent environmental reviews that say, okay, if you can plan carefully, building in SoDo should not affect the movement of freight. Do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stadium, that was definitely part of it. That also had some stuff around whether or not public money should be going towards helping build a stadium in SoDo. But yeah, I think it's tough because you're not talking about it's sort of an easier argument to have when you say this plot of land used to be industrial and now it's housing, but when you're talking about sort of traffic flows generally, that's a little bit harder of an argument to make because you're sort of depending on traffic engineers' analysis, but you can never really be sure. And so I think what we saw with the port around the stadium and with this is, in some ways, even with those analysis, they push back on that development because of sort of how concerned they are about impeding traffic flows. I can't say one way or the other how legitimate it is, except for that, it just goes to show just how protective of those areas the port specifically really is.
Yeah, and how powerful
even the whiff of even the whiff of encroachment is enough to get them to oppose something that like I said with Ryan Calkins, certain port commissioners might really support in other parts of town. But just even the sort of suggestion of creating more friction for industry down there is enough to get them to really push back. And like you were just saying, the port has shown it's pretty effective at doing so. It's a pretty powerful entity.
Yeah, I remember in talking about that stadium issue several years ago, that led to that Lander Street overpass, which I think has been a huge boon for a number of freight companies around that area. So I'm interested to see where the conversation goes from here, because I don't think this conversation is over, even after 16 years of discussion about how to do this at the city council level. So we'll see a little bit more from the council on that this week, and we'll follow up on that as well. But I did want to move on to another interesting transportation issue with you here, David. It crosses over into some important race and social justice issues for the city of Seattle. So the Seattle Department of Transportation has released its latest equity report. And there's a lot in here, folks. Two big concepts for me, David. There's equity in terms of where and how transportation projects and improvements are happening in the city, and also who's getting the contracts to work on those projects. So first up, I want to talk about this idea of creating equity in our transportation system. SDOT is calling this a transportation equity framework. Bear with us on the political language flying around here. But David, what does that mean to you to have an equitable transportation system? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, you think about, you look at maps of where people are getting hit on bicycles or while they're walking, or where there is pollution, or where housing is being built, or where highways are being built, or where highways have been built. And, I mean, when you drill into a lot of that stuff, it's sort of the story of, frankly, racism in a lot of America, which is poor neighborhoods of color, bear the brunt of a lot of the pollution and dangers of our road system. And, beyond that, the city is under a federal consent decree to fix its curb ramps, which were found to be, systemically out of compliance with the Americans with Disability Act. That's an equity issue too. And so, I mean, this is kind of the essential question around transportation, really, which is who does it serve and who doesn't it serve? This it's more than just an inconvenience. It can be life-threatening. It means access to opportunities, long-term health implications. And so, when we're talking about equity in the transportation system, we're really, it's more than just transportation. We're really talking about equity in America and in cities. Yeah,
definitely. This brings to mind the discussion we've had a few different times over where to put a Sound Transit station and the big pushback in Chinatown, just the construction of such a station and what it would do to that neighborhood and really weighing those different impacts. So there's a lot to consider here when it comes to where actual infrastructure is put in place. But I did want to talk about the second part too, who gets to work on these transportation projects. I thought this was interesting too. SDOT is reporting it's just short of its goals to have women and minority-owned businesses involved in consulting on these projects, and actually has exceeded its goals when it comes to purchasing. And I was just thinking about this, David, in terms of the Move Seattle levy, massive package for transportation funding, expires the end of next year, folks. So a big vote on that is coming your way. How important is this issue of equity when it comes to the job of selling and renewing this levy? I think that enters the conversation too.
It does, yeah. The contracting process, it's kind of ingrained in a lot of Seattle. I mean, I feel like this kind of focus is maybe more heightened after the Supreme Court's affirmative action case. But how do you kind of steer opportunity? That decision doesn't directly affect this, but it does sort of put into the conversation. How do you steer opportunity and money towards communities that maybe have missed out or have been denied that in the past? And so that's what the city is trying to do with its women and minority owned business initiative or enterprise. I don't know what the E stands for in that.
Yeah. Enterprise. Yeah.
So, as far as what it means for renewing the levy, I don't know. That's a good question. I think probably most voters are when they're thinking about whether to vote for this again, are going to mostly be thinking about what they experience and see in their day-to-day lives. Is the pothole that they wanted fixed? Did it get fixed? That sort of thing. I don't know how much people are going to be thinking about where contracts go and things like that. But, there's probably implications for which organizations come out and vocally support the levy. So there could be some sort of political implications there, as far as how full-throated of support, particularly organizations maybe in Rainier Valley or that represent a lot of these kind of minority communities. So, I don't know what that'll mean for its ability to pass or not. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there, and I know Seattle likes to pass its levies, but this is going to be an interesting one to look at over the course of the next year as SDOT works to put that case together and work on that equity issue, and also just the pragmatic nature of what the levy has been able to accomplish. So I'm interested.
Yeah, Seattle likes to pass its levies, and I'm always hesitant to even imply that a levy is not going to pass because since I've been here, basically they all have. If there's one that's going to be a little more challenging, I would think it's this one, because there have been some pretty high-profile issues with it. I mean, several resets, overpromised, underdelivered. The SDOT says it's caught up on a lot of that stuff, but I do think there are still issues just around delivery of projects and concrete strike and COVID. I guess if pressed, I would say it still has a pretty good chance of passing. But I think there's going to have to be a pretty full-throated defense of the last 9 years of work from its backers. And so I don't know that this is quite the slam dunk as maybe library, expanding hours in the libraries or whatever it might be.
Right. Excellent observations there. I'm interested to see what happens with that too, because we've talked in the past about how the dollars that DOT has in hand right now, how they've been unable to spend some of those dollars on different projects. So this is all part of the conversation here, and I know we're going to be having it over the next several months, but thank you, David. Good back and forth on that one. All right, well, up next, rent control. Councilmember Kshama Sawant is back at it with a new push for a priority she has had for several years. But can she overcome all the legislative hurdles needed to make it happen? We are exploring that question next on Now Hear This. Well, in case you missed it, Kshama Sawant held a press conference last week to talk about rent control. It's something she has brought up for the past 8 years, just about as long as she's been on the council here, perhaps with more energy now as she has decided not to run again for council and with her term ending here in 2023. So her new legislation would pass a limit on rent hikes here in Seattle, and they would tie any rent hikes to the rate of inflation. But it would also only be triggered if and when the state lifts its preemption on rent control, which has been in place since 1981. As Shama Sawant told the crowd at a press conference last week, state Democrats are not getting the job done.
Maybe they used this year's session to lift the unjust ban on rent control, right? You would think that they would do that given the extreme crisis for the majority of our society. No, what they did do was refuse to bring two separate bills to repeal the unjust ban, even for a vote.
David, I guess first things first for me, does the council want to pass this at the city level? We'll put the state on the back burner for a second here, but I'm just considering the makeup of the council, especially thinking about how Councilmember Strauss and Lewis are campaigning for re-election. This is a bit of a hot-button issue. Does Shama Sawant have enough votes to get this passed out of the council?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, she's brought this up before, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And I would say that this council is probably at this point a more cautious one than even the ones that had the opportunity to consider this before. Some combination of just its makeup, but then also it being an election year. I think a lot of the council members feel like they're on their heels. I think the council being on its heels is probably exactly why Shama Sawant likes bringing this up. Any opportunity to sort of make them feel a little uncomfortable and put pressure on them is one she relishes. You know, I think for her part, it's also she's out of office in January, and this is kind of a thing she's been pushing for since she was elected, and hasn't really made progress on. So you know, I don't know. I guess I would be surprised. It's a pretty big commitment to make in the next. I mean, where are we with July? So how many months is that? Just a few months. Before she has to go. You know, this is a fairly, and then we've got the recess at the end of the summer, and then budget. At which point basically all new work stops. So you're looking at basically there has to be real progress here in the next month, and so I think I'd be hard pressed to see that happening. But it is sort of one last parting shot that she gets to take and reestablish her agenda one more time before she leaves office.
Yeah, and just looking at what's happening at the state level, because of the state preemption that's been in place on rent control, state Democrats have been working on this issue over the past several years, and this is not popular with landlords, as you might imagine, but it appears state Dems have this goal now to, rather than simply lift the state ban on rent control and just let cities figure it out, they want to create a statewide rent stabilization system that would offer supports for renters and landlords. And I thought this was interesting, David, because your colleague Sarah Grace Taylor wrote about this for the Times. Does Shama Sawant's work on this issue and her attack on state Democrats too, does that poison the well when it comes to actually creating some sort of rent control system statewide? What do you think?
No, I don't think it does poison the well. I think a lot of the legislature is pretty good at ignoring Shama Sawant before, and especially as a lame duck. You know, this is gonna be probably over and done with by the time the session begins next year. So no, I don't think it poisons the well. And you know, they have the argument to make that Shama Sawant is not a Democrat, which is true. She's not a Democrat. And so, you know, I think this is probably a debate that will play out without Shama Sawant. Maybe she'll testify down there after she leaves office, but I think the legislature is probably going to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what they do with this one, because it looks like there's some energy behind it. Is there enough to actually make this change at the state level? I'm not quite sure. I also wanted to talk about something with you, David. This happening this week, actually, a full council vote on some changes coming to the Community Police Commission. So, of note, among these many changes, reducing the size of the commission from 21 members to 15, also eliminating a requirement that at least one commissioner must represent each city council district, and also adding a new deputy director and increasing stipends for the commission members. So I wanted to talk about this because the CPC has been under fire from some activists over the past several months for not being responsive enough to the community. The CPC has cut off public comment at recent meetings after a few shouting matches there. And I'm looking at this, David, and it appears the council believes that adding a new deputy director and reducing the amount of commissioners is going to help the CPC. Do you have a take on this? Do you agree with that, with what the council's doing here? This was a little bit of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, I think the district I'd be curious. I don't know the answer to this, but I know in the past it hasn't been super easy to find qualified people to serve on this. And, when you layer on the requirement that there be one person from each district, then you're really kind of narrowing your pool of possible and qualified applicants. And then, 21 people on a commission, that's a big commission. That's a lot of voices. So, but, as far as is that going to sort of solve the concerns or issues that people might have with the CPC? I don't know about that. But, it's a lot of people volunteering their time, and large commissions can get pretty inefficient pretty quickly. So, maybe that had something to do with it. But, I guess I don't know what the sort of final goal here is.
Yeah, a lot of questions for me, too, and how this is going to settle out is going to be interesting to watch as well. But I guess the root issue for me is how important is it to have a strong and trusted community voice coming from the CPC? This is really the goal here, right? This is supposed to be where the public's voice really enters the equation when it comes to police accountability in Seattle.
Yeah, in theory, it is really important, and this was a big fight in the negotiations around the federal consent decree to get this in there. Mike McGinn likes to take credit for that as a push to have sort of this community voice in there. There is sort of, though, the essential tension, which is, can you, having a community voice that then is seen to become as part of the larger system, is it still the community voice? I don't, I think that's kind of what the CPC has struggled with a little bit. Not to mention, it was sort of meant to be representative, so they have police officers on the board. I think some activists don't like that, and they don't have. There are civilian boards around the country that have sort of real power. They don't have that. This is advisory. They can't fire people. They can't implement policy changes. And so I think there's a frustration. I think among some people it's seen as sort of a bone that has been tossed to them that maybe doesn't sort of carry the weight that they'd like to have.
Yeah. I know they're working on some possibilities of allowing the CPC to fire members of this commission here with a vote of the CPC and potentially not a vote from the city council on that specifically. There's a lot going on with this, and I know the council is going to be working on this week, but certainly a lot more fallout from this ahead. So we'll be keeping an eye on that issue as well. Tons to look at here over the next couple of months. All right, well, coming up, you thought this past weekend was bad for traffic. Well, guess what? We're just getting warmed up, folks. David has been looking into what the state DOT has called monster road closures for some of our major highways and interstates. We're talking about that next on Transportation Talk. David, you posted a story recently in the Seattle Times warning people about a monster weekend of traffic, and that monster is in quotes from the Washington State DOT here. It just had me thinking, we always have bad traffic weekends during the summer. A lot of work goes on during the season. I get it. But in terms of the size of this most recent monster, if you had to choose, was it closer to this past weekend the giant insects from Cloverfield? They wrecked a lot of stuff. Or was it more like Godzilla, who took apart entire cities? What do you think?
Maybe the insects. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. All right. Didn't have atomic breath, it sounds like. Okay.
I didn't say this in the piece. My sense is, I think WashDOT has gotten whacked a few times in the past for being accused of not being communicative enough. So despite their warnings, people still get surprised when I-90 or, in this case, 520 is closed. A couple months ago, there was a closure on I-90 that, we heard from a ton of people. WashDOT had made announcements that this was going to happen, but we still heard from a ton of people who hadn't heard about it for whatever reason. And so I think, I think they repeated the word monstrous many, many times in the press conference and in their news releases. So I think this is kind of their attempt. And, it worked. We put it in our headline. This is their attempt to convey the impact of it. I think there have been closures in the past that have probably been more disruptive than this one. But I think they're probably just trying to be a little more forceful in their communications to people so that they cannot be accused of, not giving people heads up that these things are happening.
Fair. Well, what's on tap for the rest of the summer? Because it sounds like there might be some more monsters hiding under the bed here. What are we looking at? Some more big closures, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, the big ones are going to be just around 520, which is
Okay.
Creeping into, it's got probably another year of work, because this is the side, a lot of it around Montlake, finishing that lid there and finishing ramps on and off 520. But putting in some new components of the floating bridge and paving and things like that. And so, this is this long, very expensive project that has been ongoing for a long time now. And in theory, they're approaching some of the end game on this.
Yeah.
But that, part of that means that they have to make a real push. And so I think that's what we're going to start seeing, is specifically around 520 more closures. But, I-90 needs work too.
Sure.
In theory, at some point, there's going to be more light rail work that's going to the east side across Lake Washington. Trying to think, where else are we going to have big construction impacts? Of course, on the waterfront, there's going to be more. Maybe it's not quite Seattle squeeze level at this point, but some real stuff.
Yeah. I did want to ask, though, it does seem like summertime is the time that all these projects start happening, right? I mean, I imagine it's because weather's better. I mean, I'm not just seeing things. Summertime is when they're really getting after on these big projects, right? Yeah,
summer. I mean, it obviously weather is, if you're pouring concrete, you need good weather for it. So, obviously weather is a factor. I think around 520 in Montlake, also part of it is UW is not in session and the football season hasn't started. So you really don't want to be closing Montlake Boulevard during a Husky game, for example. And so I think that's part of it. Zooming out, the bigger picture that is going to be interesting is WashDOT is saying, they're going to have to. WashDOT and the governor's office, frankly, has said that the legislature has not budgeted as much maintenance and preservation dollars as they actually need. The legislature doesn't actually deny this. They say that their focus was on finishing projects like 520, some of these big projects. So there are we have actually seen some preservation work, specifically on I-5, get pushed back, delayed sort of permanently. So. It's interesting. I think that in some ways we probably would have seen a bigger push towards preservation, but some of that work is getting pushed off because of prioritization around funding. Doesn't mean that the work doesn't still need to be done, but it's just maybe not happening all at once quite as much.
Got it. Thank you for that breakdown. I did want to ask one quick question here as we wrap up here, David. So Mariners manager Scott Servais said shortstop J.P. Crawford was the MVP of the first half of the season. Good defense, pretty stable bat there. Who do you think emerges as MVP of the second half of the season? Who does it need to be? What do you think?
Well, I think if the M's have a shot, it's I feel bad putting all this weight on Julio, because I think the team should have been built a little bit more around him, and it's asking a lot of a 22-year-old to basically have an MVP season in his second year. But I think he and probably Eugenio Suarez both need to start hitting a lot of home runs if the Mariners are going to make a playoff run.
I like it. I would love to see it. We haven't quite seen it yet, but we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Suarez had a home run last night, so that was a good sign.
Yeah. No, it's weather gets warmer. He starts warming up too. So I'm hopeful on that one too. David, thank you so much for joining me once again. Thanks to everyone listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen. So please jump in there and subscribe. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support there too. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.